and welcome to the Ideal Wealth Grower YouTube channel. My name is Axel and I'm the founder of Ideal Wealth Grower. And the question that I'm going to address today has been posted by a friend of mine who said, well, you have been on many podcasts, you have written articles, you're mentoring people and so forth and so forth. And the purpose, like in the Ideal Investor Show, our podcast, we basically talk about the path to early retirement. So the question that was posted is, what does it mean, or what's the best way to retire wealthy? And for me, one of the first things that comes with that is to really clarify, how do we actually judge or talk about wealth, and what does it mean to be wealthy, and how is wealthy defined? And I believe it's important to realize that there are a couple of different ways of wealth and being wealthy that we should acknowledge, and then maybe narrow it down to what we actually mean in the context here with Ideal Wealth Grower and the strategy, the out-of-state turnkey real estate investing strategy that we are suggesting for the people that we mentor, or anybody who would like to know how we work and what we are actually doing and why we're actually choosing the different investments that we do. So wealthy in a fundamental sense means, if you go on Google or to a dictionary and so forth, having an abundance of things. So for example, an abundance of money, or an abundance of assets. But it also, and you have probably heard this before, can mean an abundance of other things, like for example, an abundance of knowledge and experience. You may have heard people being told, hey, you have a wealth of information to share, or you have a wealth of experience that you have gained through all the different things you have done in your life. So those are also different parts and different areas of wealth, but they are different than what we're focusing on, and that is wealth in assets, wealth in resources, wealth in money. And the best way to get there as a really, really big picture approach is first to say we have a certain finite amount of time in our life. And if we were able, and if there were, like I really, really wish there were training or classes in school and in college on how to handle money, how to become wealthy, how to be successful, working with the money that we make through the activities. Because if you really go to the very first step in the beginning of most of our life's activities, after we have done some schooling and made a decision, where do we want to actually apply ourselves, use our talents, it's an exchange of time for money. You do something for somebody else who needs it done, and they give you money when you spend time and effort on it. So the exchange of time for money, and most people call that a job. So you take on a job and you're getting compensated by basically learning how to do the job well, and the better you do it, the more money you get. And then you combine that with experience, because while you're doing the job, you're learning things, you're getting better and faster, and you learn more about it. And so you can actually make a career out of it. Now, with that money that comes out of this exchange of time for money, the question becomes, what do I do with this money? And ideally, if we were aware that wealth is making the money work for us, rather than us continuously through our whole life working in this exchange of time for money, if we were aware, and I wish we could somehow find a way to make that happen as early as possible. People at home learn about it, in high school learn about it, in college learn about it, so that we already have the concept. And what the one first thing, the best way to get to a wealthy retirement or a wealthy life would be to always look to put aside at least 10% of the money that comes in out of that exchange, with the purpose of investing it and making it work for us. So then the other part is, how do I get there in the best way, and probably in the shortest amount of time, is by avoiding to make mistakes. And one of the aspects of making mistakes is not only I'm investing in the wrong thing, or I'm believing into the wrong story, or I'm putting my money in the wrong asset class, but it is actually, in my view, mainly a matter of how do I manage my risk, right? If you, for example, say, okay, I have heard that it is a good idea to invest in the stock market. And I was actually in kind of like a time in my life around the year 1995 to 2005, in that 10-year period, where it made a lot of sense, because I had actually more money coming in than I needed to pay for my daily expenses and for the costs of having a life with the family. So I actually had some extra money and I put it into an accumulation account, and the question became, what do I do with it? And then I looked at, okay, what is everybody else saying? And I had no significant experience in investing. So what everybody was talking about is that we are reaching a new time, a new emergence of technology, and the year 2000 coming pretty soon, and everything will be different in the new millennial, and everything will basically be technology based. In the end, and in hindsight, that was called the dot-com time. So people opened companies with names like carrepair.com, carparts.com, housing.com, all kinds of places that all were called .com, and that's why it later was called the .com time. And you could invest in these companies, but because I didn't have much experience, and thousands of other people as well, we invested in the premise of the new age of technology. What we didn't know, because we weren't experienced and we just, as some people say, drank the Kool-Aid, listened to what other people were saying, but not really doing our own research, because we had focused our activities, our knowledge, our experience, our wealth of information on our jobs. That's where we were really good at. Like me, I was really good at flying planes and fighter jets in the military, in the Air Force, and teaching other people, younger people, on how to do that successfully. That's what I was really good at. Not very much knowledgeable, no wealth of information about stock market invest. And with not enough information comes increased risk. And what ultimately happened to me in this case was I did these investments like many other people too, because I believed they were good investments, and it was basically putting more and more air into a bubble, and the bubble got bigger and bigger and bigger like a balloon, and ultimately around 2002, 2003, in a very short period of time, the bubble burst. Why? Because it was found that the companies that all had this .com name behind it, in their name, the .com in their name, they weren't really companies, they were just ideas. And over time, naturally, all the people that invested expected that these ideas would turn into businesses, these businesses would turn into profits, and the profits would be shared with the shareholders who put their money in. But the vast majority of these companies remained to be ideas and never turned into a business. And when that became obvious, the whole bubble burst, and all these companies with the .com in their name disappeared, went bankrupt, went out of business. And guess what? My investment and that of many other people disappeared with it, to the tune, in my case, of almost $75,000. That just evaporated within a month. Now, what it took and did for me was to say, okay, I have to get better at this. I won't have many chances in my life to go through this cycle of investing, hoping something is going to be good, and then actually ultimately become wealthy. So this whole thing in the definition is an abundance of money, of assets and so forth, is correct, but it's not just accumulating something in abundance, because I had thousands of these .com shares. But what you put your money in, it needs to perform for you. It's basically putting the money to work for you. And you need to find the place where you can put your money to work, where the risk that work is not resulting in profits and results is very low. That's how we ended up investing in real estate, and why I would answer the question, what is the best way to retire wealthy or have a wealthy life, is low-risk investments that actually have a history of working out, because they meet a need that is never going to go away. And there aren't that many. I'm only really aware of 3 that will never go away. The one thing we always going to need is food. And food is both the nourishment, things that you can grow and eat, and water, or something to drink, most of the time, water or water-based things. So that's food. The other thing we all need, so that we can actually do something meaningful, regardless whether it's for money or not, is security. If you don't live in an environment where you are secure and you have to spend all your time to keep yourself and your family safe, you cannot really, for one, do a job. You cannot really work for anything. You cannot really accumulate wealth. You cannot accumulate assets. You cannot become wealthy. So we have number 1, food. We have number 2, safety and defense. And then number 3 is shelter. Some place we need to live, and where we can house and grow our family and have safety in that sense. And then we can actually start developing our life beyond those three things. And when I looked at that and I said, well, do I want to be a farmer? No, I like gardening, but I don't want to do it on a professional level. I was in the military for 22 years, so I did my share for the providing of safety. And then in the second half of my life, I wanted to look at, okay, what is the third thing in this list? And that is shelter. And how can I actually provide shelter, not just for myself, but also to make my money work, to provide shelter for other people. And that is real estate investing. And that's why actually investing in real estate is, in my view, the best way to become wealthy, because you don't need to exchange your time for money. You take part of the money that comes out of that exchange and make it work for you. So now you have the first part of your money working for you and making more money out of it. And anything that comes out of that, which is called cash flow, you can accumulate again and put it into the next investment and it works. So the same kind of money that is initially coming from your own efforts now has two things to work on. And when these two things work well and actually generate income, you can put it to a third one and a fourth one. And for most people, if you have a reasonable lifestyle and you're not splurging and spending money on crazy stuff and so forth, you will, depending on which area you're investing in and what's the time for the investment, like right now, for example, real estate is relatively seen expensive, so the performance is a little lower. But like everything, the economy is always going up and down, so there will be times in the future where real estate is relatively medium priced or maybe even lower priced and the performance is even better. So I'm just saying this for you to understand why a certain number of properties working for you, or basically investments working for you, is a certain range and not just one number. And the other reason why it's not just one number is because the needs for people is different. If I say I need $5,000 a month to have the life where I don't need to work, where I can do what I'm passionate, I can help other people and not worry about money, which is a definition of wealth. There is an abundance big enough for me. That abundance might be 5,000. For somebody else, it might be 10,000. So where you say this level of abundance starts is individual. That's why it's not one number. And the economy is the other reason why it's not one number. Taking those two things together, I would say on average, you will find that you need initially anywhere between 8 and probably up to 20 investment properties. And the ones that we are actually talking about are anything like single family, a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, or some kind of like short-term rental facility, but all within the frame of less than 5 units, because in the United States, that's the limit where you can get government financing. But also conceptually, that is pretty much what you can expect, both to be attractive for investors as well as for individuals to say, I want to own, for example, a duplex. I live in one side and I rent out the other side. So anything beyond that is basically commercial real estate, and that is an area that we are not necessarily in. That doesn't mean it's bad or anything like that. The risk is a little higher. It can work in different ways. The funding is totally different. So I don't want to go in that direction. I just want to tell you single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, or short-term rentals. And then you need to get a whole bunch of properties. For each one, you need to get financing. Then over time, as they get paid off 15, 20, 30 years into your investment journey, then you basically make more and more money. If somebody, on the other hand, made a great deal, right? Let's say you bought a house 5 years ago and you are part of this crazy price appreciation that we have gone through. And let's say you paid for that house $200,000 and now it's worth $300,000 in 5 years. Not unrealistic, happens all the time these days. Now you have $100,000 and in the first year you can buy 4 houses. Now if you can do that, then you don't need to get to 15 or 20. You're probably going to be easily done by having 10. Why? Because you're starting out all at once with a much bigger chunk rather than over many, many years working, maybe getting one each year or one every other year. So that's the reason why it's between anywhere 8 to 10 up to 20. But with 20, for sure, regardless who you are, if you live a reasonable lifestyle and you're not just throwing money out left and right, abundance doesn't mean being reckless. Abundance means you have enough or a little bit more than enough to cover everything, within reason, right? Nobody says you have to have $1 million yachts and you have to fly around the world all the time and you have to basically use all these kind of things that are losing their money right away when you buy them, drive them off the lot, or you go to Tiffany's once a month and buy jewelry, that kind of stuff. That would be reckless. But wealth is not reckless. Wealth just means you have an abundance of assets and therefore an abundance of money coming in to cover everything that you need. So that's why we're saying, for one, shelter. One of those three fundamental things is the best way to retire wealthy. And then you want to also secure that with maybe a few other investments that give you additional security, like, for example, silver coins, gold coins, art pieces, and things like that. That if you run into a time where there is high inflation, you have this additional level of security. What you want to avoid are any kind of investments that are high risk, because if you, especially as you get older, you may not have enough time if you get wiped out like I was. Luckily, I wasn't that old yet and I have time to recover and build the portfolio we have yet. I just wish I would have known what we just talked about, what the best path to wealth is, because then I would have looked at the risk and would have said, okay, are these .com things actually safe? And they weren't, and I wouldn't have invested. It's an expensive lesson to learn, and that's why I make these videos, because I want you to understand how this works, what to focus on. So in a nutshell, it's an abundance of assets, money being one of them. You want to get to a point where you have more than you actually need to live well, nice, wealthy life without going overboard. And you want to start as early as humanly possible, because the earlier you start, the sooner you reach the point when you're wealthy. If you're following our strategy, or you want to basically get in touch and get our help through the mentoring programs that we are offering, we will help you to get into residential real estate, build that portfolio over time. And when you have 8, 10, 12 properties, you're probably at the point where you can say, I can now live the wealthy life. Not necessarily saying you would never invest again, but you're at the point where you no longer need to exchange time for money and have the freedom to do what you're passionate about. And that means you have reached the time freedom point, which is where the wealthy life actually starts. So I hope that was valuable to you. That gives you an idea. And wealth is available for everybody, and that's why I keep saying I so much wish we would teach it earlier, and you don't have to go to a YouTube channel that you may have found by chance. You could actually learn it in school. I'm glad that you found us, so if you're not already a subscriber, I would love to ask you to subscribe, give it a thumbs up when it was actually helpful and gave you some new perspective on what wealth and how to get there actually means. If you like what we're doing here at this channel with this video and others, please share it with your network. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and enjoy the new year.